This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. That is a sound you may or may not have heard before. That is the sound of a drone. Drones have proven to be very effective in war, but now scaled-down unmanned aircraft, also called drones, although different, are making their way into the hands of private individuals and businesses. They aren't as robust as military drones, but they have the potential to cause problems when existing rules and regulations aren't followed, and that seems to be happening on a more frequent basis. Recently, and despite height restrictions on these drones, a CMPD helicopter had a near miss with one while flying over uptown Charlotte, putting that helicopter and the people on the ground in danger. Airline pilots here and elsewhere in the country have reported drones flying in restricted areas around airports, and remote-controlled flying vehicles that carry cameras or other instruments are supposed to be registered with the Federal Aviation Administration and in some cases with the state, too. Many drone owners don't bother. Experts say the technology is outpacing regulation, but some drone owners either ignore or are unaware of existing regulations as well. And that's what we're going to talk about this hour. WFAE's David Boraks has been reporting run-ins with drones in and around Charlotte and North Carolina, and interestingly enough, as luck would have it, David is a drone owner.
That's right, Mike.
I'll ask you why in a minute. Welcome back. As a matter of fact, all three of our guests today are drone owners. Basil Yap is the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Program Manager with the North Carolina Department of Transportation's Division of Aviation. He joins us this morning from Raleigh. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
And sitting in Lincoln, Nebraska is Ben Kreimer, head technologist for the Drone Journalism Lab at the University of Nebraska. He's also a professional journalist exploring journalistic applications for aerial drone technology, as well as the legal, ethical, and regulatory issues connected to this emerging field. Thank you for being here as well, Ben.
Good morning.
Morning. David, you report that CMPD says that encounters like the one with their helicopter, which was recent, are becoming more frequent. How frequent?
Well, a few weeks back, CMPD at their weekly briefing with media talked about drones, and they said they're seeing drones in their helicopters about once a week right now. And, you know, some of those are closer than others. Some of the incidents that they've had recently have been as close as 20 feet to one of their helicopters. And, you know, if a helicopter, which is cruising along at cruising speed, maybe 100 miles an hour, runs into a drone, that could be a pretty bad accident. So they're seeing them a lot more often.
What kind of damage could it do? Because these drones are usually, I would think they're less than 55 pounds, right?
They are.
They're not moving at 100 miles an hour, but they are moving in some cases. Sometimes
I mean,
they're
they tell us the word that the sergeant in charge of the helicopter unit says any collision like that would be catastrophic, which means it could take down the helicopter.
Wow. So aside from the CMPD incident and some reports from airline pilots landing at Douglas International, how big a problem are drones becoming, either because of their increasing numbers or because people are ignoring or are unaware of the rules governing these, I don't want to call them vehicles, these, what do you call them? Machines.
Unmanned aircraft systems, unmanned vehicles flying around in the sky.
Flying machines.
So, I mean, is it a problem? How big a problem is it? I mean, there definitely are more. That's one reason. And there are definitely people who are using these who are not following the rules. It's important to understand that there's really two big camps here. There are the people who are trying to use drones and getting interested in this, either as a hobby or for their businesses. And then there are the people who are already flying aircraft around in the sky. And to many pilots, I think drones are an intrusion into their airspace, literally and figuratively, and they're very concerned about it. I mean, if you've ever been up in a light plane with a pilot, like a Cessna or something, one of the things that they do is they ask the other passengers in the plane, okay, everybody get your eyes out, help me see what's out there, because the biggest threat to a plane in the sky is something else that they don't see. So, as you can imagine, pilots are really worried about this, and they think it's a major threat. People who use drones want a little space in the sky as well.
Yeah. So, Basil, what is this problem cannot be peculiar to Charlotte. This must be happening around the state, is it?
Yeah, so if we look at the numbers that we have on how many drones are registered in North Carolina, and this is from the FAA, we're over 21,000 drones, and that's a lot of drones when you compare it to how many registered manned aircraft there are. Now, this excludes military aircraft. and that's going to be around 3,000 to 4,000. So just some rough numbers, you can see it's about a 3-to-1 drones to manned aircraft. So I think certainly, it highlights the need for us to educate drone users in our state about the rules and regulations about safely integrating with manned aircraft in our airspace. So, definitely this is good. Sorry.
That's okay. There may be a lot of people who are either peripherally understanding what we're talking about here in terms of what these aircraft are, or who don't know anything about them at all. You can literally walk into a Best Buy right now. We could get up from this table and go buy a drone at Best Buy, right?
That's correct, yep. Or even easier, you don't even need to get up. You could just order it on Amazon.
Right, and they'll deliver it by drone.
That's right.
If I can do this, when I buy this drone, and well, first of all, how big are the drones that you can buy at a Best Buy or on Amazon? And what do they look like? What are they capable of doing? How fast are they capable of flying? How high are they capable of going? Let me bring Ben into this. He's sitting in Nebraska asleep, so let me bring him into this here. What about those? They look like toys, but they're not.
Yeah, well, I mean, they range in size from a drone that would literally fit in the palm of your hand and not even, extend to your fingers, up to, some of the larger multi-rotor drones, so multiple rotors like rotors from a helicopter, I would say are the size and larger than, say, an extra large size pizza box in terms of the, the circumference of the box.
So how high can they go?
And they can, well, I mean, if you think about it, a drone can essentially go as far as, depending on the hardware, unless there is a software feature that prevents this, it can go as far as it has a connection to the remote controller, or even further if it's flying autonomously, which some drones can. So certain drones, like the DJI drones, which DJI makes the famous, sort of ubiquitous now, white drone, that is capped at, I believe, 1,700 feet. Legally, you can only fly to 400, but the point is they can go far beyond eyesight, and they can go very, very high.
How fast?
Well, there's now a sport around racing drones, and some of these racing drones, which they're quite small, if you put both of your hands together, you could easily hold one of these small racing drones, and they can go to speeds approaching 100 miles an hour.
Wow. Okay, so if I go to Best Buy and buy one of these drones right now, Basil, do I have to do anything else except pay for the product and walk out the door with it, or do I have to take lessons? Do I have to register it with somebody? What if anything, do I have to do?
Well, it kind of it depends on the use that you have for it. So there's really kind of two groups of users, and the FAA, or the federal government, kind of breaks them into two groups. So the first group is going to be hobbyists, those that are simply flying for fun or recreational use. And traditionally, this group of people have been the model aircraft group. I can think of my uncle. He built model aircraft from scratch and flew them around, and they've been doing that for many, many years. So hobbyists or model aircraft users are one group. Now, the second group are going to be commercial or government operators. Those are going to be real estate photographers, construction sites, those that are using it for their business or for some type of government function.
But do you have to do anything? Do you have to announce to some entity, whether it's the Department of Transportation Division of Aviation or the FAA, that I'm a drone owner, here's the serial number on it, and this is what I'm going to do with it?
You're right. So there are different rules that would apply for each category of user. So back in about 2 years ago, back in 2015, the FAA, or the federal government, required all drones to be registered that were larger than half a pound. And that was a simple go online, register it. You had a number that was given to you, and then you would put that number on your aircraft.
But today?
And also, that was for both hobbyists and commercial users. Now, recently, you may be aware that there was a court case, appellate court case in the District of Columbia, which struck down that requirement for hobbyists to register their aircraft. So at this time, that ruling has been struck down, although I will note that the FAA or the federal government still has their website up for registering. And I think it's a good best practice to go ahead and register your drone.
So where there have been infractions of either existing rules or people complaining about drones getting in the way of other aircraft, have those infractions been committed mostly by hobbyists, by commercial users of drones, or is it split 50-50? Or do we know?
Typically it's by hobbyists, and it's unintentional. They're just unaware of the rules or unaware of where they're flying. That has been most of the cases that I've talked with the FAA or the federal government about.
And of the 21,000 drones that you say we have here in North Carolina, how many of them are hobbyist drones versus commercially used drones?
A large portion.
A
large portion of them are. About 17,000 of them.
So, Ben, a second ago, Basil compared this to the model aircraft hobby enthusiasts' hobby, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But this seems to have taken off more, and that's not a pun. This seems to have taken off more than model aircraft hobby. This seems to be a lot more popular. What is it about drones? Because you're a drone enthusiast for many different reasons. What is it about these drones that have captured people's imaginations?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that these drones that people are buying off of Amazon and pulling out of the box and flying around are a lot smarter than the hobby aircraft, remote control helicopters and airplanes that people have been flying for many years. They have sensors on board and the computational power that basically lets the drone fly itself. That was not the case, and that is not the case with more analog versions of remote control aircraft. And so because of that, drones are really easy to fly, which means it's really easy for somebody to just buy a drone, pull it out of the box, and you're up in the air. And so because of that, it's suddenly, in a way, democratized access to remote control aircraft, both for, in good and bad ways.
And another aspect of this, Mike, is that they have cameras, and I think a lot of people are interested in that. So it's not just a toy to fly around like a model airplane. It's got a camera. You can take pictures of whatever you want. You can use it for your work if you want to. Although, back to what Basil was talking about with the requirements, if you're going to use it for a commercial purpose, if you're going to, sell a photograph to a real estate agent to use on their website, technically you're a commercial business using that, and so you're subject to more stringent requirements, including you have to get a different kind of a license, which involves tests and all the things that you think would come with operating any kind of a piece of equipment like this.
And Ben, you're the head technologist with the Drone Journalism Lab, and also with a Kenyan-based organization called African Skycam, and you're interested in the journalistic application of these devices. When we come back from the break, which evidently we're 30 seconds away from, I'm going to ask you about that, because I think all of us have seen television newscasts in which drones have been used to give us a bird's eye view of disasters like what happened in a tornado or a flood or a forest fire. But I know that you have ideas about using drones in ways, for journalistically speaking, that go well beyond that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll also get into the privacy concerns about drones with cameras and more in just a moment. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Hendrick Kia of Concord, offering over 300 new vehicles at the dealership and over 8,000 pre-owned vehicles online. Details at hendrickkiaofconcord.com. And Miles McClellan Construction, dedicated to meeting each of their clients' needs when it comes to project performance and its technical requirements. More info about Miles McClellan's approach at mmbuildings.com. Tomorrow on the local news roundup, Charlotte's homicide rate rises again with more deaths over the weekend and 3 on Tuesday night. Charlotte's mayor's race gains some candidates with a total of 5 Democrats now running. Republican Ralph Norman wins the 5th congressional seat in South Carolina, and a year after a young woman dies from a brain-eating amoeba, her family sues the Whitewater Center. Those stories and more with our roundtable of reporters tomorrow on this program at 9.
I'm Tom Ashbrook. Coming up on the next On Point, commuter planes that can't fly, door handles too hot to touch. The heat dome crushing the southwestern U.S. this week puts other heat waves to shame. We'll look at dealing with heat in an abnormal new normal. That's coming up on the next On Point from NPR.
Stay tuned for On Point from 10 to noon following Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the growing ubiquity of drones in our skies and some of the problems they are potentially causing. David Boraks is here. He's a drone owner, and he has reported on this for WFAE News. Basil Yap, Unmanned Aircraft Systems Program Manager for the North Carolina Department of Transportation Division of Aviation, and joining us, he's in Raleigh, and joining us from Lincoln, Nebraska, Ben Kreimer, head technologist for the Drone Journalism Lab at the University of Nebraska. Now, we've all seen newscasts where forest fires or floods or tornadoes or some horrible thing has happened someplace, and suddenly, because they have this technology, they will switch to the camera on the drone, and it suddenly flies up, and you get the 30,000-foot view. But there are other ways that journalists are now using these drones for, and other ways that maybe are still in development. Ben, what are some of the other ways that journalists are using these things?
Yeah, so primarily up until today it has been the sort of, I'm going to call it fixed frame photos and video, because today there's a lot of enthusiasm and interest around doing virtual reality storytelling, 360-degree storytelling. And so drones are now, some of the work that I've been doing involves a special combination of cameras on the drone, which lets you produce a virtual reality video 360-degree experience from the drone. Basically, it's like a flying camera platform where you don't see the drone at all, but you can look all the way around, up, down, completely 360 degrees around the drone, and there's just nothing there. So virtual reality storytelling. There's also, drones have wide applications across many different industries and are used in many different ways. And one way that has been used for some time now in more surveying applications is producing maps. So you're not producing even video or just single images, but you're actually producing maps of areas, kind of like with Google Earth. You can fly a drone over an area and map out the area underneath to a much higher resolution than what you would find on, say, Google Earth.
Is this where you're talking about the ability for these drones to be flown with certain cameras or certain sensors that result in a 3D model being produced?
So there's that, and actually that process, to get extremely technical, is for a moment, is called photogrammetry. And it actually doesn't require anything special. You can use a standard camera that comes built into your drone, and really it's just a matter of taking photos in a particular way and then processing those photos in special software that lets you produce a map or a 3D model. But it doesn't require anything special when it comes to the camera. It's just a stock onboard camera. A GoPro can do the job.
Mm-hmm. So let's some of these drones have to be registered, some do not. In North Carolina, and there are state regulations. Each of the 50 states, I think, have some regulations regarding these, or at least have thought about it. Basil, in North Carolina, if you have a camera attached and you're a hobbyist, or if you have a camera attached and you're a journalist, or if you have a camera attached and you are just a professional photographer selling images to real estate agents, or you want to take a 30,000-foot view of the outdoor wedding and you're a bridal photographer, do you have to have a license? Do you have to pay a fee? Do you have to register your drone? Are you there, Basil?
Yes.
Okay.
You will need to do all the above that you mentioned there. So yes, you would need to get a North Carolina operator's permit. And that exposes you, the purpose of that permit is to expose you to some North Carolina-specific laws around privacy and safety. You will need to register your drone, get that permit, and then follow the laws around taking photos of others. And the laws are really there to protect your privacy. So if you're at an event where the public is invited, just like you'd be at a park or any other public event, then there is no restriction on your photo being taken. But if you are in an area where you have an expectation of privacy, say maybe your backyard and your backyard's fenced in, and a photo would be taken of you, the law states that you could take that person to court and get up to $5,000 per image. And I'll just note that these laws date back to 2014. So I think our legislature at that time kind of saw some of the privacy and safety concerns that were growing and addressed them back then.
So are you saying that
they've been on the books for a while?
Are you saying the state has taken the position, or maybe the federal government has too, that you own the airspace over your own home?
That's a state issue, yeah.
So you do own that area? What if you live in a high-rise condominium or apartment? Do you own the airspace outside your balcony window?
That's a great question that's being debated. It's turning into a gray area that has never really been, decided in the courts. And we see this debate at the local level, at the state level, and again at the federal level. And what we've seen the federal government or the FAA traditionally take the approach that privacy, when it comes to them and their control of the airspace, falls on local or state government. So this is a local or state issue we're talking about.
Let's just go back for a second, Basil. When you and I talked previously about this, you kind of divided what the national law does and what state law does into two camps. The national FAA rules are really aimed at the airspace and safety in the skies. The state laws are looking at the way that drones interact with people on the ground, is the way that you described it, right?
That's correct, yep.
Well, here's an email that should muddy the waters even further. Megan emails, for the past year, a drone has been flying around the Noda Villa Heights neighborhoods, dropping treats, usually whole bags of marshmallows, in neighbors' yards. What gives? Is this an inside joke for drone fans? It is a little funny, but also unnerving, and many neighbors are worried about their pets ingesting the marshmallows, the candy, chips flying around the neighborhood. Is this considered trespassing?
So I will just comment that if my daughter was listening, she would be absolutely thrilled about someone dropping marshmallows in the backyard or other types of treats. But again, this is that gray area of where does your expectation of privacy start. And so there are some rules about dropping things from a drone at the federal level. And then when you are placing anything in someone else's yard, that could be considered trespassing. But that's a very interesting case that you mentioned.
I would think you could call it littering in some cases.
I would compare this. What if you stood on the other side of the fence and lobbed those marshmallows into your neighbor's yard? That would be weird.
Yeah, it would be weird. Is this happening elsewhere, Ben? Have you heard? I'm looking at Ben on Skype, and I'm seeing him smiling broadly here. So you're either enjoying this or you've heard of this before.
I'm enjoying that very much. I've never heard of anything of that sort. I mean, for as a commercial operator, so I have my Part 107, which means I'm legally able to fly commercially. If I were to do that in the scope of my professional work, I would be breaking the regulations around the Part 107 FAA regulations. So, as a hobbyist, though, I mean that's really funny. I've never heard of anything like that.
I want to say that one of the problems we have with drones right now is people getting them and using them without really thinking about how they are impacting others. And regardless of what any state or federal law says, if you're operating a piece of equipment like this and you're using it in a way that will distract or bother or somehow impact your neighbors, you're not being a good neighbor. You're not being a good member of the community. And I think that's one of the major issues that we have right now. And I think we need to look at that.
And it's an example of technology outstripping regulation or even outstripping common sense because it's so new and novel for most people that they haven't really thought it through. The state, though, Basil, has made it illegal to hunt or fish using a drone. I'm not quite sure how you would fish using a drone, but it is also illegal to attach a weapon to a drone. And given that people have ignored some rules, are they ignoring these rules, too?
Well, if you get on YouTube, you'll see plenty of videos about people using drones to fish. It's rather interesting. They'll attach the line to the drone and then fly it off the beach a good distance and then drop that line into the water so they can really extend their cast out there. But
so this would be in the ocean or in lakes?
Well, in lakes or on the coast of North Carolina, Outer Banks, or beautiful beaches. But to go back to your question about are people ignoring these rules, we are not aware of any cases that have been brought against individuals using a drone to weaponize a drone or to hunt or fish. But certainly people are thinking of unique ways to use a drone, and I think the hunting and fishing is an example.
Why is it illegal to fish with a drone? Why would that be illegal?
Well, that would be a great question for legislature when they had put these specific rules together. And I will note that there's also a rule on the flip side that says you cannot interfere with the lawful taking of wildlife, which would include hunting or fishing. So while you can't use a drone to scout for deer possibly, at the same time, if you're duck hunting, someone can't go and fly a drone around and scare all the ducks away.
But you can also not shoot down a drone, particularly over an urban area, because it's illegal to discharge a firearm in the city. So if a drone is bothering you, if you feel like it's hovering over your backyard, spying on your backyard cookout, or hovering over your third-story bedroom window, just hanging there, what are your options? What do you do?
That becomes a police issue, and the police do get reports of drones. You sometimes hear it on the radio, and we hear them talking about it. You can call the police and say, "I think this drone is bothering me," and they will have to make a determination. Then, is there any rules being violated, any laws being violated? And then they will have to find the drone owner, which is really the biggest problem that we have right now. Is it's really hard to track down somebody who's doing this. But we have had cases where the police have track these guys down. Outside
of Lincoln, Nebraska, or Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm trying to think of a third city in Nebraska that I can think of, and I can't. You seem to have a lot of wide open spaces. Is this less of a challenge in Nebraska than it might be here?
Yeah, I mean that's partly why. So the drone journalism lab at the University of Nebraska, it kind of made sense. Matt Waite, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, started the drone lab back in late 2011. And, frankly, we have an advantage out here, which is we have a lot of space. And so for example, for myself, as a Part 107, commercially certified operator, actually, to go off on a slight tangent related to what we've been talking about, the funny thing about being certified by the FAA to fly a drone is that you don't actually know how to fly the drone. When you take your test, when you go to your FAA testing center, and if you pass, which gives you the legal ability to fly a drone commercially, you don't have to have ever even touched a drone. You don't have to know how to operate it. And so that's kind of a funny, sign of the times, I suppose. But going back to
so they're testing you on your knowledge of rules. Is that what they're testing you on?
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to the rules, when you can fly commercially, you can immediately go out and fly an open Class G airspace, which basically means if you're out in the countryside, you're far away from airports, away from towns, but primarily it's how far away are you from an airport.
Right.
And you can go out in western Nebraska, and there's an airport here and there, but for the most part, there's just nothing but farmland, ranch land, and so that makes it really easy to fly. And that's why most of the stories that I've been doing have been in remote areas. They've had to do with environmental stories. It was about drought in the state of Nebraska, and we were flying out near farmland.
In North Carolina, I think everywhere it's illegal to fly near airports. How near airports? Yeah. How close to an airport can you fly?
There's 5 miles is the general rule. There are exceptions.
As we sit here downtown, are we 5 miles from the airport?
I think we are.
So it's okay to fly it downtown?
Well, you're over a populated area. There's other rules about that. So none of these rules are cut and dried.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, well, you can't fly over people.
Oh.
Period. Unless you have a waiver from the FAA. So for myself, I'm not able to fly over people unless I get extra permission to do so.
These
That's
drones,
one of them.
these drones have to be under 55 pounds. I'm sure if a 55-pound drone crashed into somebody, it would be very damaging. But some of these drones that you're talking about that you can hold in the palm of your hand, if they crashed into you, would you be injured?
No. I mean, and this kind of as a funny aside, there is this difference as we've kind of fleshed out between commercial and hobbyist applications, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, a couple of years ago, an individual, and this is still true, if you have any kind of flying machine that you're using to take photos or to use in a commercial context, it doesn't matter how much it weighs. And so there was a guy a couple of years ago who he basically licensed a paper airplane with a camera on it and that had a little electric motor. And he got a license from the FAA. He certified that paper airplane to do commercial work. And so, there's that, which is technically you could go so small that we're talking paper airplanes with tiny motors and tiny cameras. And would that hurt anybody? I really don't think so. It might, sting like a mosquito. Some of the larger drones, though, I mean, they're like flying lawnmowers.
Wow.
I mentioned, the white drone that we've seen photos of in the news, the drone that landed on the White House lawn. That drone, it is like a flying lawnmower. You wouldn't want to put your fingers in the props. It would hurt. It's not going to, cut your finger off, but it's going to hurt quite a bit. So
these drones are only allowed to fly as high as 400 feet in altitude. How high is that? How would I know if I'm out in Freedom Park flying my drone?
So
how would I know it's at 400 feet and I need to stop right there?
a couple of the buildings in Charlotte are in the 500-foot range, so it would be not as high as one
How
of those
high is the Bank
skyscrapers.
of America?
Oh, was it like 560 feet or something?
You can't go to the top of the Bank of America tower.
No, and you can't go on top of a building and fly a drone up even higher. I mean, if you're already up that high. There was a case recently where somebody called in a report of a couple of guys flying a drone on top of a high-rise here in Charlotte. And, again, there are exceptions to all of these rules, but in general, I mean, the users need to be thinking about, is this a good thing for me to be doing?
Yeah. So my first encounter with the drone was on Christmas night. And I was driving back through a neighborhood near South Park. It was after dark. I see this object in the sky with lights on it, and it looks like it's not far away. It looks like it's right there. It looks like what you would think a UFO encounter would be. So I stopped the car in this neighborhood and just looked up. And then the thing swooped down, and I thought, oh, my goodness. I thought that, have I been dipping into the eggnog too much here? But then I turned the corner. I started driving by, and I turned the corner, and there's this guy in his front yard with this device in his hand. So I thought, it's a drone, and he's operating his drone, which obviously was a Christmas present. Was he breaking the law because he was flying it at night? He was only at treetop level. Was he breaking the law? Did he know? Quickly.
You are not supposed to fly at night.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
exactly. We have to take a break. I'm going to go through some of these other rules and regulations and then ask you this question. Why bother? We're coming back in a moment at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the Iron Yard, offering full-time web development courses in Charlotte for attendees' career development. Enrollment is open. More info at theironYard.com/Charlotte. And Hefner Financial of Charlotte, Jim Hefner, is an independent fiduciary financial planner whose team specializes in retirement solutions and tax strategies. Information at you'lljustknow.com. Well, a heat dome is crushing the southwestern U.S. and putting other heat waves to shame. Isn't that a nice thing to have to say? Yesterday, Phoenix hit a daily record, as the mercury hit 119 degrees. Likewise in Death Valley, California, where it was 127 degrees. But as they say, it was a dry heat. It's so bad that even some planes are unable to fly. So they'll take a look at this abnormal new normal on point in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock. Stay with us. We have more on drones in a moment.
David Porter, General Manager, Hendrick Acura, a WFAE underwriter.
Businesses more and more have to keep engaged with your clients and figure out a way to keep them coming back. WFAE seems to have that figured out. We have seen that WFAE has almost a lifetime loyalty among the listeners. We hear that on a regular basis.
To learn more, email underwriting@wfae.org for details.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about drones and the regulations surrounding them and some of the problems that they may or may not be causing as they become more ubiquitous in our skies. Ben Kreimer is the head technologist at the Drone Journalism Lab at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. David Boraks is one of our reporters here at WFAE who regularly covers this, and Basil Yap is the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Program Manager for the North Carolina Department of Transportation's Division of Aviation. You wanted to point something else out, Basil, about flying near airports.
Sure. So, as we previously mentioned, there's kind of two groups of users, right? We have the hobbyists, recreational users, or we have the commercial users. Like Ben mentioned, he's a Part 107 operator, and myself is also in our group here at the Division of Aviation. But to kind of clarify about the 5-mile ring around airports, when we look at the federal law around that, when you fly within 5 miles of an airport, you must notify the airport prior to that operation. So that is the law that the federal government has for hobbyists. But there also is a law that says that the drone can't be operated in any way that's going to interfere with manned aircraft, and I think that was certainly the case with the helicopter flight with the local police department.
If there are 21,000 of these vehicles in North Carolina, and there are probably more in other densely populated areas, and certainly becoming more so every day, as David pointed out a minute ago in the break, a lot of people get their drones on Christmas, although by December 26th, half of them have crash landed and broken. Nonetheless, the population of drones is increasing exponentially every year. And we're talking about Amazon or UPS and others wanting to use these vehicles eventually as delivery mechanisms to bring packages quickly to your door. Are we going to reach a point where we're going to need an FAA division or an FAA traffic control division for these devices?
You know, you could say that. Go ahead, Basil.
They're actually already looking into that. So NASA's doing some great work there. Seeing how do we incorporate unmanned and manned aircraft into the same airspace. You mentioned that 400-foot limit that we would typically see, and so if you want to get before that or above that 400-foot limit, then you're kind of getting into the manned aircraft area. So the government is already looking at that. NASA's kind of taking a lead there. And we're going to continue to see some development there and some rules about that.
So the FAA has these guidelines for recreational users of drones. Always fly below 400 feet and within your line of sight. Do not fly near stadiums, public events, or directly over people. Do not fly near airports or aircraft. Do not fly near emergency response situations like accidents and things. Do not fly for compensation. Do not fly at night. Do not fly a drone that weighs more than 55 pounds. Does that seem overly restrictive to most people who are hobbyists, or do they mind those rules? And if you follow all of those rules, exactly where can you fly your drone?
That's a good question. Again, going back to what I said earlier, I think you have to bring some common sense to using these things. And those rules, I think most hobbyists would say those rules are common sense and they're easy to abide by. You just need to know them. There are some other aids. I mean, you can get an app on your phone called Before You Fly from the FAA, and it helps you to understand what the rules are about the place that you're standing. So that could be pretty easy. There's also a website that I was exploring in the past couple of days called Know Before You Fly. We were talking before about what it's like to fly in rural Nebraska versus here. Mm-hmm. The map in the Charlotte area, if you were to pull that up and look at what the situation is between heliports on tops of buildings, the airport, the restrictions on height and all that, the Charlotte area is a place you need to be really careful using your drone. And I think, following those kinds of rules like you just read from the FAA is a good place to start. But, if you're a commercial user, you're even more closely in touch with these rules. You've had to take a test about them, and you have to get waivers. So you actually have to go through a bureaucratic process to fill out a form, tell somebody where you're going to use it, get approval for it. And, that makes it a little bit safer for the aircraft that are flying.
I know, Ben, that a lot of newsrooms want these, and I think one of your organizations or some journalistic organization has said every newsroom ought to have a drone and use it not all the time, but use it when necessary, and because to use it, People need to practice with it. They ought to have at least one person on staff who goes out and practices with it and knows how to use it. So given all these restrictions for hobbyists, do they also exist for journalists? If you're going out to cover a story that you think would be enhanced by the use of a drone, you're going to have to fly over people, over roads, over congested areas.
Right.
Can you use them?
Yes. I mean, it is difficult. So there's two things that I'll share. The first is, if you're going to fly over people, you can apply for a waiver. At this point, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to get it, but there's been a lot of talk in the FAA about loosening up those restrictions about flying over people. And they've also been doing studies about what happens when a drone collides with a person. So that's one thing. Airspace is in some ways the bigger issue at this point. For example, right now, where I'm sitting, I am in Class C airspace. And I know this because from memory, but also because I've got the Before You Fly app on my phone. So I recommend anybody who has a drone, I recommend you get the app Before You Fly. It's free, and it will tell you automatically when you open it what airspace you're in. So right now, I have the app open, and it says, you are within 5 miles of an airport. By law, you must notify the airport operator and the air traffic control tower if one is present on your flight. And I'm actually in Class C airspace. It tells me this too. But basically, as a hobbyist, this would tell me I don't have to remember anything. If I remember, open the app and see where I am in terms of airspace, that'll tell me what I need to know and what I need to do. Now, the funny thing about this differentiation between hobbyist, recreational drone flyers and commercial operators is, based on where I am right now, as a hobbyist, if I have my recreational flying hat on, I can go out, I can call the control tower, and I can fly. But as a commercial operator, I am unable to fly. As a journalist, I am unable to fly unless I get permission from the FAA to do so.
Wow.
So in a way, it's easier to be a hobbyist, especially where I'm standing right now. I can just go out, call the tower, I can fly.
And perhaps that is why, David, you and hobbyists like you seem to be becoming the enemy among commercial operators. You spoke with a commercial photographer, Patrick Schneider of Huntersville, and he says drone hobbyists are making it difficult for professionals like himself.
The problem stems from the fact that you can walk into any Best Buy anywhere and you can buy a $1,000 drone and put it in the air without any need to understand the rules. And that is my concern with the regulations overall, is that there's a lot of people doing stuff with drones that basically ruin it for a lot of other people that are trying to do it and make a living from doing it.
So in what way are hobbyists making it more difficult for professionals to use their drones?
Well, I mean, we're doing a show here about, in some ways, about the problems with drones. And the problems with drones, as we said earlier, are often from people who don't understand the rules or don't follow the rules for some reason. And, if you're a professional who has invested the money in a fancy drone, you've gone through the long process to get a license to do this, and it's not easy. I mean, you got to devote a week to studying, and then you got to get an appointment with the FAA. And I'm hearing from folks who are doing this that it might take weeks to get an appointment to get your license from the FAA. And, when you are out there doing your job and you've gone through all of this to get your license and to do it the right way, when you meet somebody who is not doing it the right way or is violating the rules, it bothers you. And, Schneider says he sometimes encounters people who aren't following the rules and he questions them.
I think there's a lot of people hiding behind, I'm just a hobbyist, because the rules are very different if you call yourself a hobbyist as opposed to a commercial drone operator. And people are very quick to say, no, I'm not doing this commercially. And I've run into that, where I will question somebody who's dangerously flying a drone in an area where I am, as well as questioning, well, what are you doing? What's this all about? And initially they're like, I need to photograph these buildings for a client, blah blah blah, and I'll ask them, well, so do you have a commercial drone license to do so? Oh, no, I'm just a hobbyist.
So Richard emails, I fly my drone responsibly, but the rules have become so extensive that if you followed every rule, you could only fly in a desert. I am fully aware of drone abuses, but let's not do the traditional government response of passing more laws. Anybody have a take on that? How about you, Basil?
Well, I think certainly it's everyone's responsibility to fly safely, and we definitely want to be educating each other. But the reality is we're all in this drone community together, those that are commercial operators and hobbyists, and we certainly want to work together as a group to come up with some common sense laws that are going to benefit everybody and at the same time protect the privacy and safety of folks that are not operating a drone.
I mean, to oversimplify it a bit, I mean, you wouldn't want to drive on the road where people weren't at least obeying some of the rules,
Right.
And that's how we are.
Well, unless you're in Rome. James emails, I think the most concerning aspect of drones is that while there may be regulations guarding against certain uses of drones, there's no possible way to actually govern and enforce them in any real way. This is going to be part of a new aspect of terrorist activity, and without more restrictions on sales like background checks, etc., this will be problematic on many levels. That never even occurred to me, but why wouldn't that occur to people in power or people at the FAA or people in law enforcement or national security? Or has it already occurred to them?
So it has, in a lot of ways, already occurred to them. So at the same time that drones have become more and more popular, you also see now new, what we call counter-drone technologies. And the FAA is doing tests around airports with detecting drones that could possibly interfere with aircraft. There's products now available. You're probably going to see, prisons and other high-security areas that are going to use technologies like this to kind of detect drones that are incoming. And then we see the military developing technologies to detect and then counter or disable a drone that could be a threat to a national security interest.
At the University of Nebraska, at your organization, Ben, you mentioned your colleague, Matt White, and he was quoted in an NPR story as saying the real frontier for drones in journalism is going to be through investigative and explanatory reporting, using them to gather data. What does that mean?
So, I mean, that could mean data could be just photos, it could be video. What we're doing out here is we're experimenting with this idea of what else is possible. What else can we use a drone to gather? And by that I mean, could we mount some sort of sensor onto a drone so that we're not even interested in capturing the visuals? And so basically that's what he's getting at, is moving beyond just photos and aerial videos and into other forms of data that we can gather from a drone. Because really, if you think about it, a drone is literally a flying computer, but as an analogy, a drone is like a computer in that you can do so many different things with a computer, from play games to word process to edit video. So a drone is really a multi-tool, a sort of Swiss Army knife of the air, and it all comes down to what you attach to it. What do you have underneath your drone? What are you doing with it? And that's what we're interested in, is figuring out what else can we do with a drone to tell a story.
Basil Yap, Kyle Snyder, who has been on this program in the past when we talked about drones about, 2 or 3 years ago, he's the director of Next Gen Air Transportation Center at the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State University. He says that the public needs to know what agencies are getting these drones and what they plan to do with them. Why is that important?
Well, that's important because the public is often concerned about the uses, and if the agencies purchasing them can kind of illustrate the benefits to using them. And I'll just kind of briefly talk about a couple uses that we use here at the Department of Transportation. One of the uses is to reconstruct accident scenes. So when there's a fatality at an accident scene, they need to document that entire scene. And the traditional technology they were using was taking, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, and we were able to fly, a staged crash scene in less than 15 minutes and capture almost all the data that we needed. And if you think about that, that opens our roads back up quickly, is less exposure for police officers and emergency response folks to traffic, and so that is a great benefit there. But I'll give you an example. In Seattle, there was a police department out there that decided they wanted to get some drones, and this was back in 2012. So they went ahead, put together a program, purchased some drones, but they never engaged the community. And when it came to light, there was a public meeting about them using drones, and if you can find videos and photos on the internet about how upset they were, and in fact they closed that whole program down, and they had already purchased drones and kind of set in place a program, but they didn't talk with the community about it, so there's a little bit of miscommunication there.
I'm really short on time. I have about a minute left here, and I'm curious about when people break the law or break the rules. For instance, the situation with coming too close to a CMPT copter. How do you find those people who are operating the drones, and what kind of liability issues do they face?
So there's actually no way to track it electronically right now. There is a discussion about whether to require drone manufacturers to add this equipment to drones. Mm-hmm. Right now, the only way they can do it is if they have a report from someone on the ground who sees the operator and says, he's at the corner of 6th and Tryon or something.
And I think the FAA estimates that there are going to be, by 2020, 3.5 million of these things in the air. So I guess this is an issue we're going to be talking about again in the future, as hopefully not because of an accident, but because of regulations and/or traffic control issues with these things. Thank you all for being here. I didn't have time to ask you why you all fly recreationally, but I'll get that answer from David off the air, I guess. Ben Kreimer, head technologist with the Drone Journalism Lab at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Basil Yap, unmanned aircraft systems program manager with the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and David Boraks from WFAE News. Thank you all.
Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins